Chihiro Furuya is totally obsessed with zombies. He's your typical otaku, really into all the undead stuff. But then his pet cat Babu gets hit by a car and dies, which makes Chihiro super depressed. He really loved that cat and can't stand the idea of losing him. So he stumbles upon this old manuscript that talks about bringing the dead back to life. Intrigued, he decides to give it a shot and starts doing these weird experiments in this creepy abandoned building he found. One day, while he's there working on his experiments, he runs into a girl named Ria Sanka. Ria's got her own problems. She feels like her life is completely controlled by her strict family, and it's really getting her down. She's there venting about her life, and Chihiro accidentally overhears her. She finds out that he's been listening to her private rants, and instead of getting mad, she gets curious about what he's doing. Ria ends up deciding to help Chihiro with his resurrection experiments. She thinks it might be a way out of her suffocating life. Plus, she starts to warm up to Chihiro and the idea that if she becomes a zombie, he'd be there to take care of her. It's kind of a strange bond they form over these bizarre circumstances, but it works for them. Ria decides to help Chihiro with his zombie experiments. One day, she's climbing up this cliff to grab a plant that Chihiro needs for his resurrection formula. As she's doing this, she starts thinking about her dad, Dan Ichiro. He's always been super controlling and obsessive, not letting her have any friends or freedom. It's been really tough on her. Anyway, she manages to find the hydrangea plant they need. She takes a little bit of it herself, just out of curiosity, and then gives some to Babu, Chihiro's dead cat. But Babu doesn't show any signs of coming back to life, and this makes Chihiro pretty bummed out. He figures his experiments are a bust and decides to call it quits. As Ria and Chihiro go their separate ways, Chihiro and his cousin Ranko Soji suddenly notice something amazing. Babu actually did come back to life. Meanwhile, things get even worse for Ria. Her dad punishes her again, and feeling completely trapped and desperate, she decides to drink the formula she took, hoping it will end her misery. Later on, Ria wakes up after trying to end it all, only to realize that her suicide attempt didn't work. She's now a bit freaked out, but then overhears her dad, Dan Ichiro, talking about his crazy plan to castrate Chihiro. She knows she has to warn Chihiro, so she sneaks out of the house. Meanwhile, Chihiro is out chasing the now-alive Babu, who's leading him to a field full of hydrangeas. When he gets there, he looks up and sees Ria at the top of a cliff. It's a pretty intense moment because Dan Ichiro is there too, and he's getting ready to confront Ria. Ria, fed up with her dad's control, decides to stand up to him. While all this is happening, Babu climbs up the cliff as well. Dan Ichiro, in a fit of rage, goes to attack Babu, but Ria jumps in to protect the cat and ends up taking the hit herself. She falls off the cliff, gets seriously injured by a tree branch, and dies from the fall. But here's the twist. Because of that potion she drank earlier, Ria doesn't stay dead. She comes back to life as a zombie. Now, she's caught between her old life and her new undead reality. Chihiro sneaks Ria back to his room, trying to hide her from everyone else. He's in over his head, but determined to help her. He has to leave for a bit to apologize to his cousin, Ranko, so he leaves Ria alone in his room. While Chihiro is out, Ria has a brief but weird encounter with Chihiro's grandfather, Jogoro. He's an odd character, and it's a tense moment. When Chihiro gets back later that day, he finds Ria in a dazed state and showing signs of rigor mortis. It hits him hard. Her body is going to rot if he doesn't figure out a way to help her soon. Now, he's in a race against time to find a solution to keep Ria from deteriorating. Chihiro is trying to rack his brain, trying to figure out how to keep Ria's body from rotting. In the meantime, he hides her in his closet and heads out to clean the temple. While he's there, he chats with his grandfather, Jogoro, who casually drops the bomb that he's the one who originally created the resurrection potion. Back in Chihiro's room, Ranko is looking for some DVDs when suddenly Ria jumps out of the closet and starts fondling her. Ranko is totally caught off guard. Chihiro rushes in and pulls Ria off of Ranko, but then Ria turns around and grabs Chihiro, planting a big kiss on him. It's a wild, chaotic moment that leaves everyone stunned. While Chihiro is trying to explain everything to Ranko, which is already tricky enough, when Ria wanders off following Babu, She ends up in a field of hydrangea leaves and starts munching on them. This actually helps her snap out of her daze and cures her rigor mortis. Jogoro then explains to Chihiro that Ria needs to keep eating those hydrangea leaves to stay, well, undead and not turn into a corpse again. But he warns that it's not a long-term fix. Chihiro manages to convince his dad to let Ria stay at their place, which is a big win. He starts recording his observations of her, like she's his science project or something. Later that night, Chihiro and Ria go for a walk. During their stroll, Ria ends up saving Chihiro from getting hit by a car, but she accidentally injures him a bit in the process. Then things get even weirder. She starts curiously licking his wounds. It's all part of the strange, new life they're trying to navigate together. So, Ranko gets Chihiro to help her out with her family's deliveries one day. While they're working, she starts thinking back to when she first met him and how she came to understand his quirky obsession with zombies. There was this one time when Chihiro saved her from a stray dog, and that's when she started to fall for him. Fast forward to the present, and Ranko is feeling all these emotions. She makes a move and tries to kiss Chihiro, but then she pulls back at the last second and runs off. She decides she's not going to give up so easily and is determined not to lose to Ria when it comes to winning Chihiro's heart. It's a moment full of mixed feelings and unresolved tension as Ranko sorts out her feelings for Chihiro. Chihiro keeps up with his observations of Ria, and one day, she asks him to take her to the mall. They have no idea that Dan, Ichiro's henchmen, are secretly following them. While they're at the mall, Chihiro leaves Ria for a bit to go grab some lunch. During this time, Ria is approached by one of Chihiro's classmates, Yasutaka, who starts trying to flirt with her. Just as things are getting awkward, the henchmen decide to make their move and try to kidnap Ria. But Ria isn't an ordinary girl anymore. She uses her zombie strength to fend them off. Seeing that their initial plan failed, the henchmen quickly switch tactics and end up kidnapping Chihiro instead. They take him straight to Dan Ichiro, setting up a tense confrontation. Meanwhile, Ria is left behind, realizing that she needs to rescue Chihiro from her father's clutches. Now taking a bit of a detour and focuses on Chihiro's little sister, Mero. She's hanging out with her classmates Ichi Shinoda and Miko Yasaka, and they start getting curious about their teacher, Mizuki Yamanouchi. The teacher's been acting really weird, and the girls start joking around, wondering if she might be a zombie. Their curiosity leads them to snoop around a bit, and they discover that Yamanouchi has been secretly keeping a pet crocodile at school and feeding it there. It's a pretty bizarre situation, and it freaks them out a bit. Later on, the girls are chatting about zombie stories, which gets Mero thinking about her late mother. She remembers how her mom always had cold hands, which feels a little eerie in hindsight. Feeling nostalgic and a bit sad, Mero decides to visit her mom's grave to make an offering. While she's there, she unexpectedly runs into Ria. Something about Ria's presence and demeanor reminds Mero of her mother, stirring up a lot of emotions for her. It's a touching and slightly spooky moment, connecting the past and the present in an unexpected way. While Chihiro is strapped to a chair, waiting for Dan Ichiro to summon him, he ends up meeting Dan Ichiro's wife and Ria's stepmother, Aria. Aria starts telling Chihiro her story. She explains that she originally joined the Sanka family as a maid, hoping to win Dan Ichiro's love. But things didn't go as she planned. Dan Ichiro ended up falling in love with a sickly 15-year-old girl who was paraplegic. This girl, who became Ria's mother, sadly died after giving birth to Ria. Even though Aria eventually married Dan Ichiro, he was always more focused on Ria than on her. Aria then discovered the unsettling truth. Dan Ichiro's feelings for Ria weren't just fatherly love. He was obsessed with her because she looked so much like her late mother. As all of this is going on, Ria is rushing towards the mansion, determined to rescue Chihiro. Meanwhile, Chihiro is finally brought before Dan Ichiro, who has decided he needs to protect Ria at all costs. The tension is building up as these different threads of the story start to converge, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation. Dan Ichiro and Chihiro end up in a dramatic fencing duel. While this is happening, Ria makes it back home looking for Chihiro, only to be captured by Dan Ichiro's maids. They start dressing her up in cosplay outfits, but Ria isn't having any of it. Using her zombie strength, she breaks free and continues her search for Chihiro. At the fencing venue, Chihiro doesn't hold back, throwing some harsh words at Dan Ichiro, calling him a terrible father. This makes Dan Ichiro furious, but he keeps his cool and manages to pierce Chihiro with his sword. Just then, Rhea arrives, much to Dan Ichiro's surprise. Despite the injury, Chihiro is still standing, and he responds with a headbutt to Dan Ichiro. Now Dan Ichiro is really angry and tries to slash Chihiro again, but Rhea jumps in and parries the attack. She firmly states her desire for freedom. Chihiro backs her up, lecturing Dan Ichiro about what it means to truly care for Rhea. Impressed by Chihiro's words and his promise to take care of Rhea, Dan Ichiro decides to let her stay with Chihiro, but warns him not to take advantage of her. After their intense conversation, Dan Ichiro leaves Japan and heads to America, hoping to find a cure for Rhea's condition. Back at the Furuya residence, Chihiro wakes up to find Rhea dressed in a nurse costume, taking care of him. Just then, Ranko arrives and introduces herself to Rhea, playfully claiming to be Chihiro's fiancé. Watching how Ranko acts around Chihiro, Rhea realizes that Ranko is in love with him too. Chihiro is still trying to figure out how to keep Rhea's body from decaying, and meanwhile, Rhea gets excited about a local fireworks festival. Mero, Chihiro's little sister, tells him that Rhea also wants to go to school. Unfortunately, the festival gets canceled because of rain. Not wanting Rhea to be disappointed, Ranko comes up with the idea of having a smaller fireworks session at the shrine. Ranko helps Rhea get dressed in a yukata for the mini-festival. During this time, Ranko admits that she's in love with Chihiro and wants Rhea to be her love rival. It's a bold move, and it sets up an interesting dynamic between the two girls. Later, Rhea decides she wants to start going to school again, but things take a strange turn. She suddenly falls into a trance and jumps on Chihiro, biting his lip. It's a surprising and intense moment, hinting at the complexities of Rhea's condition and her feelings for Chihiro.